Hey, how's it going, everybody? Indypride here, joined by Loremaster of Sotek, and as I'm sure most of you are aware by now, we will be getting an announcement for the second game of the Total War Warhammer trilogy tomorrow. The playable factions are still up in the air, of course, but based on pure Warhammer geography, the teaser of a Lustrian jungle, Creative Assembly is currently live streaming on their YouTube channel, and what we've talked about in previous videos, we can be relatively sure what starting races we'll be seeing in Game 2. Lizardmen, High Elves, Dark Elves, and then either the Skaven or the Daemons of Chaos. But hopefully we'll be getting official word on that tomorrow at EGX Rezzed. This video, however, is not so much about the playable races themselves, although we will be focusing on that somewhat as well, but to set the stage for an important component of the second Total War Warhammer campaign, specifically the focal point of the new world, Lustria. You see, Lustria is a living, breathing continent, the most wild and unpredictable location in the Warhammer world, with the possible exception of the Chaos Wastes. It is home to the Lizardmen, the children of the Old Ones, and if you watched any of my content regarding their race, you would know they're a serious threat unto themselves. Salon mage priests who can create entire mountain ranges on a whim, create and destroy gigantic magical barriers, banishing 100,000 demons to the warp in an instant, flattening cities with the flick of a finger. And that is to say nothing of their ambushing or melee prowess, or the fact that they ride dinosaurs into battle. But the Lizardmen are just the tip of the iceberg when you talk about Lustria, and the factions that reside there, and the threats that lurk deep within the jungle. The stifling humidity in and of itself makes it hard to breathe on the continent, and tropical storms make black powder weapons almost completely useless. A magical effect constantly shifts and changes the orientation of the stars, making navigation by starlight impossible. The fog is so thick you can't see your feet or hands, and it wreathes much of the continent and the jungle, which is especially problematic because everything in the jungle is trying to kill you. Madcap fungi spore clouds drive people insane or melt their brains. Jungle swarms of little tiny critters poison the shit out of you. Carnivorous plants the size of dragons rip you in half. Lashworms the size of anacondas eat you. Pythons the size of whales explode out from the water and crush the stallion galleys like they're made out of matchwood. Quicksand swallows you whole. Pitfalls and stake traps from the locals impale you. The jungle is inhabited by bees and other gigantic insects that can literally crack armor with their stings and bites. And the constant threat of being eaten alive by dinosaurs is always present. And then, after all of that, you still have the Lizardmen to contend with. And if you have a chance against a normal Saurus warrior, let alone a Scar veteran, or God forbid a Slan mage priest, you are sorely, sorely mistaken. Won't even see him coming. So yeah, it's a very, very scary continent, and there's a lot going on in this part of the Warhammer world. So I brought Loremaster of Sotek on board to discuss this ancient continent in more depth, which funnily enough is home to one of the oldest civilizations on the planet, but obviously is called the New World by the Empire adventurers, Stallion conquistadores, and the pirates of Sartoja, who come in search of gold and glory. So Sotek, let's talk about the layout of Lustria, the importance of the continent, and what factions we will see there, from a lore perspective and from a Total War Warhammer campaign perspective. So take it away.
Thanks, Indy. So, to begin, let's set the stage for Lustria. A lot of people understand that it's a jungle and it's based on South America, but most people aren't aware that Lustria is actually extremely diverse. It's got everything from massive mountain ranges to barren deserts, mighty coastlines, and there's more than just jungles. There's even the occasional dark forest like you'd expect to see in the old world. But at the end of the day, most of these lands are horribly enchanted due to what happened many, many eons ago when the demons invaded and the Slann were forced to make Lustria into a living hellhole. It wasn't always this way. It's been specifically engineered to make outsiders suffer for every step they take into it. So, that of course leaves the question, why would anyone want to go to Lustria, much less all 16 races of the Warhammer Fantasy universe? And the answer to that is actually fairly simple. The first, for many of the races, is just pure greed. They're looking for gold, and there's always rumors floating about cities made completely of gold and rare gems. And for the most part, these are true. The Lizardmen, unlike most of the races in the Warhammer world, do value gold, but they value it for its malleability and its longevity, not for its value. To the Lizardmen, stealing gold from them is like stealing bricks off a house. They find it mildly annoying, but they're kind of confused why anybody bothers. However, this has led everything from the ogres of the Ogre Kingdoms to the humans of the Empire and Bretonnia to come all the way across the world just looking for some sweet plunder, because stealing even some of the smallest artifacts that are just completely insignificant can still be worth your weight in gold, and at the very least get you a baron or a duchy. So many of the border princes, in fact, were founded by individuals who managed to go off to far places like Araby or especially Lustria, find just the right amount of artifacts, and start their own small kingdom. Of course, there are those like the Dark Elves and the Daemons of Chaos who have more sinister motives in mind, stealing ancient artifacts from the Slann and trying to trigger unbelievable catastrophes. At the end of the day, though, there is something for every race in the Warhammer world to find in Lustria, whether that's magical artifacts, sites of great power, pure gold, or maybe even just a good fight. So, that leads into who actually is in Lustria in the modern timeline. Every race has been there, at least at some point, during the Warhammer world's 10,000 plus year history, but we're of course focusing on roughly the year of 2501, when Emperor Karl Franz ascends to the throne, and when Total War Warhammer takes place. So the first race that we're going to focus on is the Lizardmen. Probably the most iconic of the races to be found in Lustria, as it is their home. They have 4 active temple cities that are still remaining after millennia of being under attack. Those are Itza, which is the first city that was ever built in the Warhammer world. It's probably one of the most magically saturated places on the earth, said to be so potent that walking through it is like walking through an electricity storm, just due to how many Slann are converged in one place. It also has some of the mightiest armies to be found in the world, and the greatest artifacts. Things so powerful that even the Slann dare not dwell on their nature for too long for fear of what they might discover. Next is Hexadol, the City of the Sun, which is found on the Isthmus of Pahax. This is the northernmost city that basically borders Naggaroth and acts as the Lizardmen's northern border. Here you would find the enigmatic Lord Mazdamundi, who leads the defense of his city and is the most active of the Slann. This is the most militarily active of the various temple cities and focuses on the defense of Lustria. It is often them who are under attack from people who come raiding in, as that's the one part of Lustria that's fairly easy to land on and reach valuable areas in a quick order. But we'll talk about more of that stuff later. The next city to be found is Tlaxcalan, which is further off to the southeast, near the Vampire Coast, and Tlaxcalan is the City of the Moon. And the reason it's called the City of the Moon and not the Moons is because, obviously, when the city is built, the Chaos Moon did not yet exist. Here you'll find the greatest astromancers ever to be found across the world, and the Slann and Skink priests there are actually obsessed with getting rid of the Chaos Moon, and they have actually been quite responsible for a number of empires falling due to them shaking the Chaos Moon or splitting off small pieces of it, which then caused warpstone meteors to fall down and squish people. It likely was these very same Slann and Skink priests who may have caused the fall of Mordheim. The final of the Lizardmen temple cities that is currently active is Zlanhapek, which is the City of Mists. The reason it is obviously called the City of Mists is because it is in fact enshrouded by a very deep fog. However, this is not naturally occurring. Long ago, the Old Ones taught a spell to the Slann that so long as someone is keeping the incantation going, causes a thick fog to pour out of their mouth that is magically charged, and is said to have demons and other eldritch horrors lurking within it to help defend the city. It doesn't actually have any walls, but it's so hard to find the city due to this mist that you can walk within feet of it and not even realize you pass by one of the greatest Lizardman structures that exists. Every army that has tried to attack it has failed miserably. That being said, not all of the temple cities in Lustria have Lizardmen within them. Many of them have fallen into ruin and have been inhabited by foul, worse, and darker things. A prime example is the main rival of the Lizardmen, which is the nefarious Skaven, the ratmen of the Under Empire that so many humans across the world don't believe even exist. You can find them most often in the city of Chakwa, which is the city of gold, or it was in its prime, and Quetzal, which is now known by the Lizardmen as the Defiled, due to its ruined state being so much worse than anything else they've ever witnessed. In both of these cities, you'll preeminently find Clan Pestilens, who of course were birthed in Lustria and were the Skaven that rose out of the horrible swamps and dangerous jungles. For instead of giving in to the dangerous nature of the jungle and caving to the horrible diseases and poisons that were inflicted on them, they embraced them religiously and adapted, becoming something far worse and far more terrible. So expect to see Clan Pestilens, maybe even led by the terrifying Lord Skrolk, to be dwelling in there, waiting for a new era to strike out against their scaled foes. To the further north, there is one particular city that has a unique inhabitant. The temple city, Zahatek, which is known as the City of Echoes, received its name because during the very first great incursion, when chaos was born into the world and demons flooded over the entire globe, Zahatek was taken down by a very special means. Whereas most of the temple cities were overwhelmed through sheer numbers, or explosions, or really interesting spells, in the case of Zahatek, the Demons of Chaos, namely the Greater Demons of Tzeentch, discovered a way to actually rip open a warp to the realm of chaos itself. This caused most of the temple city to be instantly eradicated by allowing demons to pour inside and sucking lizardmen, of course, into the realm of chaos itself, where they were just absolutely overwhelmed by the endless numbers of enemies to be found there. The spell was so powerful and so devastating that to this day it remains in effect, and Zahatek can never be recovered. It lies as an empty ruin with a horrifying rip in space sitting dead in the center of the city. And every once in a while the demons manage to tear it open just wide enough that an entire host can come pouring out. Monsters of all four of the greater powers, Khorne, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, and Nurgle, come striding forth in their hopes to take over Lustria and spread their influence even further. However, the Lizardmen have maintained a vigilant defense of the city's perimeters for 10,000 years, and have no interest in allowing the demons to escape past them. It's been an ongoing war of attrition that surely no other race could have managed, but the Lizardmen still hold strong. Moving on from the ruined temple cities, there are a couple of sinister forces that exist in Lustria, but don't necessarily have a city or permanent residence to call their home. The most famous of these is the infamous Vampire Coast found on the eastern border of Lustria. The Vampire Coast is very much what it sounds like, a coast where the undead rule supreme. Long ago, there was a rather interesting vampire named Luther Harkin, one of the Blood Dragon bloodline, who managed to shipwreck on that coast. And being a vampire, while most of his compatriots and fellow sailors were killed in the wreck, he survived and was stranded. So he did the only thing most vampires would bother to do at that point. He started to build a massive army of zombies and far worse things, but mostly zombies. And to this day, he sits there lurking, but we'll talk about him more later on. Slightly north of him, you'll find another foe who inhabits the coast, more namely the Tarantula Coast and the Scorpion Coast, which lie along the northeastern side of Lustria. And here you will find many savage orc tribes, or I guess you could call them jungle orc tribes if you really wanted to. They're of course often joined by forest goblins who worship some of the absolutely titanic spiders that can be found in the jungles of Lustria, very similar to the Arachnarok spiders you see in the old world. Distant cousins, if nothing else, probably more brightly colored. These greenskins are always looking for a good scrap and tend to invade the jungles of Lustria whenever they can, looking for a fight with the Lizardmen. Though they probably prefer to prey on sailors or other forces trying to get past them if they can. In many ways, the shores of Lustria are just as dangerous as the inner jungles, but this is due to those sinister races that inhabit them, as opposed to something the Lizardmen engineered. So in the way, it kind of works as an outer insulation. That being said, not all of the races who have inhabited Lustria are of the destructive sort. To the very, very far south, on the very southern tip of Lustria, you can find the Citadel of Dusk, where the High Elves have built an immense fortress on the ruins of what was once a very powerful site of the Lizardmen that they since abandoned. The High Elves have maintained the defense of this site for many years, and have actually even been aided by the Lizardmen once or twice. But the Citadel of Dust is a massive fortress and is one of the most important citadels that the High Elves have across the world. For along the southern tips of many continents, the High Elves have citadels dedicated to different times of day, such as the Citadel of Dusk, the Citadel of Dawn, so on and so forth. And they use these to maintain a naval network that allows their ships to sail across the world and stay resupplied with fresh troops, fresh supplies, and maintain their naval dominance. And this allows the High Elves to have wonderful trade with even the far-off realms of Ind and Cathay, as well as the Empire of Bretonnia, and is why the High Elves are considered the preeminent naval power in the Warhammer world. Much further to the north, on the Isthmus of Pahax, where you would find Hexadol, there are a few human settlements that have managed to eke out a living. The most prominent of these would be Skeggi, which long ago was founded by a Norscan by the name of Lost Eriksson, which you could probably guess how he got his name. It's not very inventive. But at the very least, he founded this city and managed to teach the people who lived there enough respect for the Lizardmen that if they steal from them, when the Lizardmen army comes marching out because they're pissed at being robbed, they know to throw all of what they've taken into the ocean. The Lizardmen will simply collect the very few things that they care about and will leave. The Lizardmen just want their stuff back. As long as you don't take their important plaques or artifacts of the old ones, you can really take as much gold as you want, and they generally don't care. It's like stealing mud from them. They just don't want to be bothered. So Skeggi has managed to survive. However, others have not been so lucky. There was once a city named Kadavo that was razed on 2 separate occasions by the Lizardmen for stealing from them, before on the third time they stole, Mazdamundi was sick of it, and rather than razing the city with armies, he simply waved his hand and caused a massive earthquake that not only destroyed the settlement, but killed every single thing that lived in it, making sure that no one was left to rebuild. There are some other minor settlements, such as Port Reaver and Swamp Town, that seem to belong to some of the more minor races of humans, such as the Pirates of Sartosa and the Estalians, but it's not entirely sure who founded them or what nations own them at any given time. The final area we need to look to for factions that you can expect to see in Lustria is the north. The reason Hexadol is the military capital of the Lizardmen, so to speak, is because most of their invasions come from the north, because that's where many of their greatest foes are. This includes the Warriors of Chaos, who have invaded numerous times, and actually had an invasion that happened right before the end times, led by Vashnar the Tormentor, who we'll talk a little bit about later, as well as many, many war herds of beastmen. They often come down through the mountains, not caring about that treacherous terrain, and somehow, probably due to the will of their dark gods, find a way to still manage to attack the Lizardmen despite all of their defenses. Of course, the most famous race north of the Lizardmen would be that of the Dark Elves, or the Drukhai. Here, the bloodthirsty and cruel Dark Elves maintain their own empire in Nagaroth, but they are extremely fond of invading the Lizardmen when they can. They're very, very fond of taking Lizardmen captives for study, raiding them to try and take their mounts captive for the Beastmasters to whip into submission, or even just searching for magical artifacts, or perhaps Slawn to sacrifice to Cain, because those are mighty sacrifices indeed. However, the way the Dark Elves invade Lustria is typically not by land. They once tried to march into Lustria by land and invade it, but Mazdamundi decided to raise a mountain range in their way and wiped out the entire army without so much as a single casualty on the Lizardman side. And Mazdamundi was so pleased with this result, he just left the Grey Guardians there, and they're now a permanent mountain range. The Dark Elves tend to invade through something that's known as the Black Way, which is a series of caverns that go underneath Lustria that are basically a part of the ocean. So there are a bunch of underground caverns filled with water, and these caverns are so massive, even the mighty Black Arcs, which are floating Dark Elf city fortresses pulled by horrific sea creatures and have entire armies stationed on them easily, can sail through these black ways undetected for many leagues and can launch a number of surprise attacks. That being said, the Lizardmen have typically won out against the Dark Elves more times than not, even when the Dark Elves try and use these sneaky passages to catch up with them, because the Lizardmen are quite frankly just not to be fucked with. That being said, that's kind of the general gist of the races you're going to see around Lustria in particular. But there's a couple of individuals we talked about, and maybe a few minor thoughts that need to be looked at a little further when understanding some of these factions who are probably going to be more important, such as the undead at the Vampire Coast. But we're going to pass things back to Indypride before we go into that discussion.
Right, so obviously Clan Pestilence and the Daemons of Chaos are going to play a huge role in the Lizardmen campaign when they're added. The question is when each faction will be added, because it's virtually guaranteed they don't come together, right? That would essentially cut out a gigantic threat from the third game, a headlining race that Creative Assembly will need to help sell Game 3. So instead of focusing on those for now, we're going to focus on the Vampire Coast and the Warriors of Chaos. So Luther Harkin, the cousin of Wallach Harkin, who we know as the Grand Master of the Knights of Bloodkeep, was a champion of Lamia in ancient Nehekara, sired by Abarash. He served under the King of Strigoi in Morcaine, and when that kingdom fell, he was lost to history, until millennia later, when Norscan pirates looted the ship that were carrying his coffin to the New World, which resulted in their zombification, and these unfortunate souls became the beginning of his own minor kingdom. He carved out a little empire for himself near Tlax on the Vampire Coast, teaming up with the Sirens to lure more and more pirates near the coast, where they would drown and become his undead minions. All was going well for his little empire until he tried to break into a Lizardman temple, which, by the way, is a big no-no. You should absolutely not try to mess with any kind of Old One's device. It goes very badly in the lore for pretty much anyone who tries to do it. And when he did mess with it, basically fried his own brain trying to mess around with an Old One's device. This event drove him insane, which in some ways lessened his malevolence and certainly made him kind of stupid. But when he actually gets his stuff together and gets his thoughts together in the very few moments of lucidity that he has, he's actually pretty terrifying. But the Lizardmen don't bother kicking him and his undead pirates out of Lustria, because frankly, he's not much of a threat in the lore. As we already talked about, the jungles are specifically designed to deal maximum casualties to any kind of invader, and if they were made to deal with the first demonic incursions, as in millions and millions of demons that first came out of the Warp Rift, they can certainly deal with a few zombie invasions here and there. So the Slann don't consider him worth their time, although this could certainly change in Total War Warhammer, because as we know, minor factions can play a big role in shaping how a campaign develops. So even though a faction in the lore might not be a big player, they can certainly become a huge player in a Total War Warhammer campaign. The question is, will the Vampire Coast be playable? Possibly. I don't know. I have a feeling CA is going to completely shy away from releasing any major race as pre-order DLC, mostly because they can't, right? There are 8 major Warhammer races left, 2 full games left, each with at least 4 starting races. Pre-order major races just don't work with that math whatsoever. So something like Talea, or Astalia, or the Vampire Coast becomes a viable option for pre-order DLC, which, by the way, is confirmed. There will be pre-order DLC, we just don't know what yet. And I really don't think it's going to be any major races for the reason that I just said. So I think CA will be doing playable minor races as pre-order DLC or as race DLC later down the line. I think it makes a lot of sense and would help flesh out the world a lot. It's also extremely likely that the Lizardmen campaign in Lustria will be under duress from a Chaos invasion in the late game, similar to Archaon's invasion of the Old World. Certainly, if the Demons of Chaos are added in Game 2, they will play a huge role as a foil to the Lizardmen, but if Skaven are the 4th playable race in Game 2, then the Warriors of Chaos will very likely make an appearance around turn 100 or so in the form of an invasion. But who would lead such an invasion? Well, there are any number of named characters CA could add, but in the lore, a character named Vashnar the Tormentor played a large role in invading Lustria during the Storm of Chaos. Vashnar rode a dragon of purest midnight, and although he never played a big part of the tabletop or was particularly famous, if CA wants to go the lore-friendly route or simply don't want to add any more Warriors of Chaos named characters at the start of Game 2, a generic Vashnar character leading the invasion of Lustria would make a lot of sense and give Lizardmen a bit of a late-game challenge. Might also show up in a few quest battles here or there. So as you can see, there are going to be a lot of forces at play in Lustria. Stallions and Empire adventurers streaming across the world pond to Lustria. We'll get Norskin streaming in through Skeggi, and the Isthmus up in the north. Possibly the Warriors of Chaos, led by Vashnar the Tormentor, appearing at the same time as Archaon's invasion in the Old World. The Vampire Coast and Luthor Harkin, and the High Elves in the Citadel of Dusk, controlling the trade routes to Cathay and the Far East. Savage Orc and Forest Goblin tribes abound throughout Lustria, and the Demons of Chaos will strike out from the City of Echoes whenever they are officially added, whether that be in Game 2 or in Game 3. So the Lustria campaign is certainly shaping up to be a very flavorful, interesting campaign in and of itself, and that's not even mentioning the continents of Ulthuan and Nagaroth, home of the High Elves and Dark Elves, that we're expecting in Part 2 as well. So hopefully this video will give you some idea about the home of the Lizardmen and the various factions that will be vying for control of the continent. Cannot wait to see what the announcement for Total War Warhammer 2 will include. I sincerely hope we get some actual information and a full-length trailer that tells us what the factions will be, because it's going to be super disappointing with all this countdown and hype if it's like a 10-second teaser and we barely get any new information. I don't think it's going to be disappointing. I think we're going to get a lot of stuff in the drop tomorrow, but I guess we'll find out in just a few short hours. So be sure to check out the live stream at twitch.tv/EGX, and the countdown on the official Total War channel will tell you when to tune in. And I will see you all again once we have heard from Creative Assembly about Total War Warhammer 2. See you guys soon. Loremaster, you got anything else you want to say?
Other than, I hope that the hype is worth it as well. I'm a hard man to disappoint, and I'm super excited for what's coming in a few hours.
Hope you guys are excited as well. We'll see you next time. Indypride signing out for now.